Hey everyone. Thank you for joining us here at Modern Sales Power Hour. I'm super pumped to have our illustrious guest here, Sara Bush, joining us live from Raleigh. Well, as we kind of like let people trickle in here, Sara, what's happening? Any big plans this weekend? Got some, any travel coming up? What are you stoked on? You're probably
Yeah.
doing some sort of like DIY project this weekend, I would imagine.
No, that was last weekend. We painted the kitchen cabinets, which
Excuse
was
me.
fun. Yeah. This weekend we're headed to the river. This is kind of like a
Ooh.
lake house, but we have family coming in, and so we'll just do a big family event. We have like a hibachi. We'll do hibachi. It's really nice. It's fun.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Well, you have to send me pictures of that. That'll be cool. Hopefully the weather cooperates there.
Just big
Um,
water.
is it more of a fishing river sort of situation, or is it more of like a water skiing river situation?
No, it's a fishing river. Like it's a huge fishing town, and there's also
Uh,
like black bears close by. There's like a refuge
oh,
close
okay.
by. It's fun.
Wonderful.
Go
Nice.
see
You big
bears
fi-
if you want to.
you big fisher person? Fisher
No,
woman?
I'm a big water person.
Big water person? All right, party. I love
Yeah.
it. Cool. Well, we can get this party started. So, welcome to Power Hour. I'm Pete Kazanji. So while folks are kind of trickling in here, would love to get everyone kind of just a few moments to get familiar with the Zoom interface. The whole idea here is to make this as interactive as possible. We have like this is just like live Q&A with someone with wonderful experience, Sara, myself to a lesser extent, and so we want to have as much participation as possible. There's a bunch of questions that were submitted ahead of time, but please do use the chat panel, use the Q&A thing. Like we'll like grab your questions, we'll answer them live, et cetera, et cetera. Let us know where you're calling in from in the chat right now. I'm in San Francisco, Sarah's in Raleigh, as we discussed previously. Yeah, so we can get started here. So for folks who are not familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, related disciplines. The community's mission is, pretty straightforward. It's to create an environment for our 30,000 members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own, help them see around corners they may not know about, just, get better, right? And so the way that we do that is through live sessions like this, through a robust online forum, and also in-person events. We actually have some in-person events coming up in alignment with our big summit that's happening here in short order. So for folks who weren't previously admitted, we'll go ahead and add you to the community here. So before we get started, a couple of reminders. Power Hour is a unique format. There's not really a specific piece of content we're going to be talking through. It's going to be Q&A based. Instead, you're here to learn as much as possible. So, please ask your questions, use the chat, use the Q&A tab. All those options work, et cetera, et cetera. Send up a smoke signal, et cetera. So we can do a couple introductions here. I'll make mine super quick. So I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium, and then also founder of Modern Sales Pros. For those who don't know, Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers, so AE, SDR, AMCSM managers and sales leaders use metrics to improve team performance. And the way that it does that is by providing a world-class harness of metrics that deploys out of the box in 5 minutes. Just connect to your CRM, and then importantly, the software monitors all those KPIs, looking for anomalies to bring that information to the managers so they can be aware of issues before they become problems, intervene, fix things, make everyone better. We're big on better here. And of course, I also started Modern Sales Pros as well. But enough about me. Everybody here is obviously here to hear from Sara. Sara, maybe you can give a little introduction about yourself, some of the roles that you've worked on recently, and kind of like describe the sales motions for the different orgs that you've been at most recently, and also explain where the headshot came from.
Yes, I can definitely do that. Frequently asked question, actually.
I mean, good icebreaker, right?
Yeah.
Damn.
Okay, hi, thank you. I've been in RevOps for about 4 years. Most recently, I was with Sonar, and before that, I was with 15Five. Before my career in RevOps, I did a little bit of everything. Like I've been on both the B2B side, the B2C side. I was an independent Salesforce consultant. I've done sales ops. I've led sales teams. I've led sales manager training programs, and way back when I even did billing and technical support. So I kind of ran the gamut on it. um, Most familiar, I have not actually worked in a PLG led organization. So just your traditional SaaS motion is what I'm used to. And I've had the honor of running everything from marketing operations to post-sale support to enablement and analytics.
I love it. And Sonar was a so Sonar's persona that they sold to was like sales operations, Salesforce administration. Who did the 15.5 buyer was human resources, I would
Human
imagine.
resources, yeah. Usually like
And then
people operations leaders.
got it. And then who was the buyer for Litha?
It was a design, so the design team. So it's an online markup and workflow tool, or it was when I was there, and it was in motion now. I think it's vastly expanded its tool set at this point.
There you go. Wow. Okay. So a bunch of different sales motions. So kind of seeing it all, right? Selling to RevOps through Sonar, a little different than selling to the HR over at 15.5, a little different than selling to the design. Yeah, totally. Well, those are really interesting, kind of like different sales motions. Yeah. So like I think one of the first things I'd love to start with here is when you think about like when an organization should first be considering to bring on revenue operations, kind of like what that ideal time is, and like when that ideal time is, and like who that ideal person is. When when would you say the right time is for somebody to add revenue operations to their organization?
Now. No.
Now.
I think it really obviously depends on the organization, but there is a point at which growth has happened so quickly that you're starting to realize breakages in the customer journey. And just bringing someone in early, I think, is really important. Somebody who's probably, honestly, your first RevOps hire should probably be someone who has done it before, and maybe a bit more strategic so that they can design the team as the company continues to grow. But you also want them to have like the tactical like chops, so they'll get in the weeds and do it.
Shit.
Actually do it. Yeah. So like, CRM experience certification, definitely a major requirement, I think, especially for your first hire.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing that I heard there that really resonated for me is like there's not really like a hard and fast rule. It's like, oh, 5 reps, oh, 10 reps, oh, 15 reps. But instead, when you start seeing breakages in the customer journey.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. When you
that's a really good.
Not see the alignment, especially like I think it happens most frequently on the marketing and sales side, right? Like to start with at the beginning, at the top of the funnel, but definitely someone that can help align those teams is super helpful.
What would be some of those kind of like early pathologies that someone might identify? Be like, ooh, yeah, these are the canaries in the coal mine of like maybe we need to like tighten up our operational capacity a little bit here.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the time, so the way that like I've kind of addressed it is like meeting with all of the leaders for the different departments and understanding like what their pain points are. And like there tends to be, friction in a lot of different points between the departments. And so looking at that and really identifying, understanding what their like issue is, or like if there's friction somewhere. But definitely like making sure you're looking at top of funnel metrics, like, are we getting to the leads? Are there enough leads coming in? What do they look like? And just continuing that on all the way through the process.
But what about before there's a Sara Bush in seed? And because like essentially what would be the catalyst for someone to be like, you know what? Now is the time for us to invest in operation. I think what I'm hearing there is like maybe there's like handoff problems between marketing and sales, or like handoff problems between like SDR and AE, or like the traditional, the leads are weak,
I want the good
situation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then I guess I wonder, like from a metrical, so like we're an interesting situation here over at Atrium because we have 15 account executives and 8 SDRs, and like we don't have any revenue operations, which like you're gonna roll your eyes at me. But that mainly because like that's me, and because like, so I guess we kind of do, but also like because we have operations like so heavily like woven throughout our just DNA, crossed with the fact that like we use the hell out of Atrium. So a lot of the stuff that would have required a bunch of calories in terms of like reporting and like dashboarding and like, you know, monitoring and whatever just gets like automated away. It's funny that like when you're talking about some of these things, like we had a situation the other day where we were trying to figure out like why there was an SDR that was underperforming. And like we thought that there was like an issue and like, you know, like a behavioral issue. And it turned out like when we dug into like, it took us like 5 minutes to figure out an atrium where we're just like, well, wait a minute, his activity's there. Like, why isn't the conversion rate there? And then like when we split out where his ops were coming from, you could see that his like prospecting ops were in line with everybody else. But for whatever reason, he had like no, like his ops or like his op creation of lead source inbound, like demo requests, kind of things like that, was like dramatically lower than everybody else. So it was kind of like, okay, like, is he just sucking at like how do you suck at inbound? And it turns out like we actually had a routing problem.
Routing issue? Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, in that case, it was very easy for us to figure out because like we're very good users of Atrium. But I can imagine it in a scenario where somebody doesn't have something like that deployed, they would be like, what's going on here? Like there's, you know, something wrong with this rep and I don't know what's going on. Okay, cool. That might be the instance to indicate to you, okay, cool. Maybe you need some RevOps help there.
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I would say kind of like people know first, like, yes, we should definitely like, we can always use the data to dig into that, but also like sometimes people will just say what is happening. And like,
Yeah.
I would definitely get people to like even listen to the first person and then dig into the data and find out the validity, right? And maybe before you start like just charging off. But definitely whether it's a rep, a customer, somebody who visited your website, whatever it might be, but like listen with like all ears and then dig
Yeah.
into the data and try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And so I think what that would be is like, so maybe the high order bit here is like, if you don't have RevOps in place and you seem to be having like polite fistfights between, you know, the VP of marketing or marketing and like sales or like SDR and like AE or AE and like CSM, that might indicate that
Yeah.
there's maybe an opportunity to do a little bit of digging in there. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So then though, like, okay, say you see these polite fistfights that are happening, you're like, man, it's time for us to get us one of them. What would you kind of like prescribe as the ideal approach for like the first 30, 60, 90 days for that new RevOps person who's in seat now and ideally, you know, diffusing those polite fistfights?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important to like meet with all of the business partners that you have across the organization, like the leaders of the different groups, also side by sides. Nobody knows it better than the reps who are sitting there on the phones, you know, talking every day. So I definitely would spend time with them as well. Go through in your
Can
first.
you describe how you would conduct like a desk side or a side by side like that? Because I think a lot of people like hear that and they're like, that sounds interesting. I have no idea what I would do.
Yeah, so I at Sonar I was doing one a week with all different departments and for like 30 minutes. And literally I just have them go through and say, you sit down at the beginning of the morning, do a screen share and show me what you do. Like, how do you prioritize your day? How do you navigate through the screens? What reports do you look at? Like, where do you go? And just literally, and I record it and then I watch it and look for all the different points where there can be an efficiency gain. And then say like, and then they'll always say like, oh, I wish I had this report. And it's like, oh, that would be great for everybody. So then I go and I build that report. Or like, somehow some very important thing got buried 15 clicks in and it's like, well, I can just search that on the opportunity page, like that's super easy. And so just like going through with a rep every week is very, very helpful.
I love it. This is one of the things that I like to, one of the metaphors I use for successful sales operations is the product manager of the sales organization. And so what you're talking about right there is user research.
Yeah.
Right. And empathy and like watching them and how they go about that. How do you do that? So you're talking about rep level. How do you do that like the manager level or the or the leader level?
Yeah, it's fairly similar, but it's not necessarily like, probably as systems based, right? And it's just going through and saying, what what question do you want to know the answer to that you cannot answer right now, or that you're
Sure.
having difficulty answering? And then going through. And so like when I started at Sonar, I went through and I think it was 78 different possible projects that I could go after that were like not just something I could execute on, today, but and then going through that list and identifying like where can we gain the most traction the quickest. And so like even though I definitely say like get 30 to 45 days to just research, know all the players, figure out what's going
Make a
on.
list. That's what you're
Yeah,
doing.
make a
You're
list.
like
Yeah.
making a list. It's not like, oh, this is a problem right here, I'm going to dive into it immediately. It's like, that's really cool. Bullet point 36.
Yep. Yeah. And then I did it based on all of like the inflection points, right? So like starting at marketing and sales, that handoff, and to your point, like sales development to AE, AE to CS, and like what are those pain points? And like, are there quick wins there? And then, total product feedback loop.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, I think that yes, the the what question would you like to answer? It's funny. That's kind of like, I mean, one of the things that we think about at Atrium is like, I would never say that we're automating a revenue operations person. We're definitely automating
Never.
like some of the more, we're definitely automating some of the like annoying components of it, or like the lower value stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the things we want to really do is make it just like easy peasy for our customers to just like hit the Staples easy button and be
Yeah.
like, yeah, like what's your biggest question right now? Like literally I was on a call earlier with like one of our customers, and they're just like, yeah, we have this question about like SDR sourced pipe and like why it's not closing at the rate that we thought it was, and or like it used to, and da 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 da. And we're like, yeah, let's just get on like a 15-minute call. And we just like jammed through a bunch of like Atrium KPIs, like, constructed a dashboard for them kind of like to do a little bit of research. And actually we invalidated their hypothesis, which is kind of interesting. Like they thought that that SDR generated pipe was like deteriorating in terms of conversion rate. It actually wasn't the case. It was actually improving. And it just kind of like, but it was like 20 minutes and they're like, man, that was easy. And so one of the things that we train our customer success people in AEs to always do is be like, so how long would that have taken you in Salesforce or Google Sheets or Looker? And they'll be like, people like roll their eyes, like, I don't know, like a day, right? Like I just wouldn't have done it. But I think that like that's a very effective thing to do, is to say, hey, Mr. Executive or Ms. Executive, like what question is like keeping you up at night right
Yeah.
now? Because then we can tackle that in some sort of capacity. Which now that you think about it, it's like there's like the product management component of it, but what we just described was like the consultant component of it, right? And
Yeah.
and then unpacking like whatever that problem could be, like it could be answered with like analytics or reporting, or it might be like, oh, okay, it might be just like a workflow optimization or what have you. But like first you got to like ask them like, hey, what's the biggest thing that's keeping you up at night? How frequently do you do that?
Uh, I have weekly one-on-ones with every single leader to make sure that like from a
Love it.
prioritization perspective, like we're headed in the right direction. But two, just like am I adequately, and I deliver like as work in progress all of the time so I can get the feedback, and I don't just deliver like a final product and say, okay, here's everything you asked for, because who knows, might have found
Yep.
20 different things along the way.
Yeah, and also, I mean, that's again just to extend the kind of like product management, like software development, metaphor here. What you're describing is like agile product delivery, right?
Yeah, I'm Scrum
And like,
certified. Yes.
oh, well, hey, there you go, right? Makes sense. Well, okay, so then you've got we've got our laundry list of like 70 things that are like pissing people off, right? And I can only, this is one of the things like, um, at Atrium, we tier our customer. Literally, the way that we tier our customers is based on how many revenue operations people they have in house. Not because like we actually sell to the revenue operations person, or like they're involved in our sale, but like it's not because like this is something that like they're going to use the hell out of. It's for the managers and for like the leaders and whatever. Like RevOps uses it too, but like it's more for like the non-technical, like less analytical kind of folks that are going to help them. But the number of RevOps people that are in house indicates the level of capacity that could solve this problem or hasn't solved this problem or what have you. So tier one is like zero revenue operations people. It's like, sales leader running around with her hair on fire, like doesn't have like visibility or anything. Then as soon as you get that first RevOps person, it's still a really prime customer for us, or prime prospect, because as soon as they show up in the organization, everyone's like shows up and is like, me, please, me. And then they have like 100 things to do, like you're describing. So now you get this like 100 things to do. How do you like prioritize within that? Because like there's just one right?
Yeah.
And you've got like 40 hours or 50 hours or 60 hours or like whatever a week, but like it's still not like infinite. So how do you prioritize within that?
Yeah, so definitely alignment with one, like company goals, just like, okay, what are we headed towards for the quarter or the year? And making sure that everyone is very clear. Like I'm really big on like definitions and clarity, and just making sure that people know what we're talking about and see the path to get there. And then making sure that like picking those projects that will increase the ability to reach those goals as quickly as possible. So that is kind of my list. It's interesting because you have to have like a short-term list and a long-term list. And I do a lot of guesstimating. I mean, shitty, like most people do, but I try to do it as best as I can. And then we just figure out like what can have the biggest impact the quickest, or what is causing the most pain. And how does that align to the company goal? And so just going through that, and then getting all of the departments to agree that that is actually the same, like that we're all on the same page, that this is the right priority list. Because in the department, there's prioritization, but then you have to look across the entire organization to understand, because again, one person. It's
my
not
needs
like,
first, my needs first, my needs first, my needs first.
Yeah. So sometimes I've had leaders go off and say like, okay, I can only do one of these two things. So you guys figure it out and come back to me, or try to help facilitate a conversation by finding a common thread, because ultimately we're all still trying to achieve the same thing. So just making sure that we're aligned on that.
And then how frequently, like what is the planning execution process on? Is that on a quarterly basis with like monthly check-ins, and like do you do like 2-week sprints on those things, or how does that work?
Yeah, so my team, we did like a huge like annual planning session just to align with the company goals, and making sure like everyone submitted. We did OKRs at 15.5, submitted OKRs for a year, and then broke them up into quarters, and then would do 2-week sprints. And we report back to the leaders on a biweekly basis on a leadership call, and just like, what is the status? What did we run into? What got pushed? What did we maybe get was easier than we thought it was going to be?
Right. And then what would you manage that out of? Did you manage that out of like, a ticketing system like Asana or Trello or something like that, or what?
Yeah, we actually built like a custom object in Salesforce, but we found that it was probably over architected a little bit, but it was
Weird.
great. Yeah, I know. But it was actually really, really great, because what we were trying to do is help people rank like and prioritize, and seeing how that aligns with company goals. And like, it was very helpful information, but at the end, I think we were asking a little bit too much of the people submitting the requests. So we started to pull back on that.
Oh, got it. So it was like a custom object that was like a ticket or whatever. So you can
Yeah,
just
and we used TaskRay for the actual management of the projects. It's the tool that we use, but it sits in Salesforce, so it was easy. I preferred in Salesforce.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So you have your initial project prioritization, and then like how does that cadence like after that? And I guess the answer to that is after the 90-day period, you do like a look back, right? And say like, hey, what did we deliver? What did we not deliver? And then my presumption would be that there's probably like, because here's the thing, especially like, startups are chaos, right? It's like Sonar 15.5. I mean, 15.5 is like not small. How big is 15.5 when you
When I
left?
started, it was 60 people. When I left, it was 250.
Yeah. Yeah. So still like not, and like a lot of things can change in 90 days, right? Like this is why I always laugh about like annual planning, because it's like, right? Like good luck. What is it like? Man plans, God laughs. And so like, how do you like then reassess? Like, okay, cool. The things that we thought we were going to work on this quarter, like we still are going to work on those this quarter, or like maybe we want to swap in some new things, or what?
Yeah, we do that. We did that on a quarterly basis. So we did like another planning session quarterly. We got all of the projects or goals of each department and then brought that together to design like how we were going to accomplish those goals. But we reset every quarter and just said like, are we going to do this? Are we really going to do this? Like, how important is it? Like, are we following the right North Star, right? And just like some gut checks. And then we'd go and deliver that plan to the leaders and say, like, this is our plan. Do you agree? You know, are you okay for third quarter for this? Because we think that these other things might be more important.
Yeah. As a reminder, this is what we agreed. You guys still down with this, or are you going to be like grumpy in 90 days? Related to that, so that's like a go forward. That's a good little upfront contract there, Sarah. Good sales behavior. Very impressive. Very Sandler of you. The On the flip side, though, how do you know that what you delivered like hit the spot?
Yeah, what we defined success metrics, right? And say like, you know, if we deliver this, we should have, you know, we should have the ability to maybe like prospect, you know, deeper into a list, or, you know, we might be able to
Yep.
improve connect rates, or like we do set up in a spreadsheet like success metrics to ensure that like we can
Mhm.
affect those. They're a little like lagging, right? Like it's like, okay, it took a whole quarter. Like some things can, you know, impact right away, like maybe speed to lead, looking for you know, parts of the process that are falling out. But generally, we're probably about a quarter or two behind to see the effectiveness, depending on the metric.
Yeah, I was just saying it's funny, like depending on the metric, like if it's win rate, then obviously it would take like a hot second for it to like
Plus, yeah,
I was gonna say like it turns out it might take a sales cycle or two. Weird, right? Before like the existing pipe like exits and like the new anyway. It's so funny. Like I had this related to the success metric thing. I was talking. This is why like as a founder, as a sales leader, as a success leader, you should always just be talking to your customers as much as possible. Because I had this like delightful call with this sales enablement leader the other day, and you know, sales enablement is like a secondary like stakeholder in Atrium, because like they're there to like either A, you know, help the reps get better, and so and then B, like ideally help the managers get better. That ends up being kind of like a secondary use case, and like unfortunately like overlooked and underinvested in, because if you think about it, like managers actually are extremely high leverage. And so if you spend your time just like coaching reps all the day on like objections versus like training the trainer, anyway, don't let me get on a rant. But the point is that, so this is a very sophisticated customer. You know, it's like a 200 seller organization. And so this enablement leader was saying like, oh yeah, well, you know, we've started to use Atrium in order to evaluate the success of enablement programs, also technology programs. And I was like, how are you using Atrium to measure like technology programs? They're like, oh, well, you know, certain vendors show up and they're like, hey, we're going to raise your ability, like you're going to be able to call more, you're going to be able to like, as you just said,
yeah,
multi-thread more. Oh yeah, like, oh, we just bought like Zoom Info or like, you know, or Lucia or whatever, and like, are the reps using it? Oh, okay, what would the metric be that would indicate that? Oh, it would be aggregate number of new contacts that they're engaging,
yeah,
right? Oh, okay, cool. So presumably, like we just dropped 20 Gs on this database, we should see a step function uplift in new contacts engaged, right?
yep,
Because like your efficiency just got higher, or the contacts per account, like a multi-threading metric, should go up. And if it didn't, are we like implementing it poorly? Are people like not actually using it? Is the data crap? You know, et cetera, et cetera. So like when she told me this, I was like, okay, yeah, that's cool.
yeah.
And I had like never thought about that use case. I was like, that's a very sophisticated use case that's like not core to us, but like, hey, God bless.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that is it's super important and definitely like have learned a lot of that by screwing it up to begin with, right? Like, so it's
Oh
like,
yeah,
oh, I needed to have defined, oh, maybe I should preempt my goals before I just go
yeah.
off and start running and doing my own thing. So I've definitely screwed that up quite a few times, but I do think, yeah, it's really important, especially when
That's
the
when the best learning
technology.
happens.
Oh, yeah, I'm really good at that. I'm really good at making mistakes very quickly, but learning from them also very
Just
quickly.
once.
Yeah,
Just once. Just
one
want to make
time,
it once.
hopefully.
Yeah.
Usually.
That's the Nelson Mandela quote, when I don't win, I learn. I think it is. Yeah. Makes sense. So kind of related to that, because we're talking about like, and one of the most important things that revenue operations does is like the smart application of technology in order to present, like drive leverage into an organization, into a sales organization. Um, Obviously there's like the consulting things that you were talking about before and kind of like the anthropological research in order to like detect the issues, but then it's also like, cool, found the issue, let's prescribe a solution and invest in blah 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 or blah 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 blah. One of the things that people get really wrapped around the axle about is like, oh, what's the ideal tech stack for a modern sales organization? What is like, how do you think about that?
I like, I'm a little bit, I'm always like, I don't know, like I don't like, I'm pretty agnostic to like what, like especially when people
Mm,
want like really super specific, like I can tell you what I have experience with, but generally I'm, yeah, like I said, I'm pretty agnostic. So like, you know, you should probably have something for marketing automation. You should have a CRM. You should have a sales engagement tool. Like you should
yep,
probably down the line, depending on where you're at, have a CPQ product, depending on how complex your product is. You should have an insights tool. You should have e-signature. Like you should have a lot of like
yep,
just, but generally, like you have to identify where you don't have efficiency first in order to understand
yep.
what tools you need to purchase. But I'm pretty, I kind of run the gamut on all of them.
Yeah, that we have this sales operational maturity model on our Atrium resource library that kind of like talks about like literally that. It's just like you should probably consider this category of thing around this time right here versus like, oh man, you really got to go off and get yourself like RevOps CPQ stat or
Right.
whatever, because it's gonna be like that was just top of mind because we use RevOps as our CPQ software and it's great, right? But like it was one of those things like for a long time we didn't have CPQ software because like we only have one SKU,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's
It
not
wasn't.
necessary. Yeah. It's like, and so I do think, again, yeah, early on, I was like, oh, we need this tool or we need this tool. And like tooled it up and like, and then, you know, it's definitely, have pulled back on that a lot. Cause it's like one, on RevOps, you don't necessarily have the capacity to administer all of those tools. It's definitely like a capacity issue. And two, like, are you really getting it right? Is the juice worth the squeeze? And then how difficult is the implementation? Like all of those things are a
Yep.
factor.
Yeah, that's always one of the things that.
It's always not fun.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's like, is the juice worth the squeeze? And the juice is kind of sour, and also the squeeze is really big when it comes to like steel brick or something like that. Which is why like modern CPQ software is like really helpful in that regard. But even in our case, like we love RevOps, but like it was one of those things where it didn't really make sense for us to get it for a couple of years because like we didn't have that many reps, right? Like the velocity of deals that were being signed or like sent out wasn't like super high, and then we only had one SKU. But then when we got to the point where we had like 5 reps, like it was kind of like eating me alive. And then people were making like math errors. And it's like, cool, we need to stop doing that. Right. And so, but given the fact that like in the case of RevOps, it's like a pretty quick deployment process. I don't know, it took like an hour or two because again, we don't have complicated product situation. It was just like, okay, cool. We're never going to have math error again. Great. That was worth it. I think that's an important thing and this kind of goes to your kind of earlier point about like diagnose the situation as opposed to being like, religious about like I must have this hammer, right? Like, well, you don't have any nails in this organization. They're like screws and kind of like bobby pins or whatever. Yes, but I want my hammer. That's like that's like not a good not a good approach. And I think that's where being a thoughtful like sales strategist and kind of like comprehending what the go-to-market looks like is really important, right? So like if you're selling into SMB, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe local businesses, then maybe like it's not as important for you to have like, and your calls are super quick and like rapid. It's maybe not all that terribly important for you to like have call recording software, right? Because like the interactions are like 5 or 10 minutes. Now it might be way more important, like obviously having a sales engagement solution in place was probably a lot more important there in order to like facilitate scaled calling. And then
Yeah.
moreover, you might think about something like predictive dialer, kind of like dialer automation, like an Orem or something like that might be something that's like way more
Way
sophisticated.
more
Like, oh
important.
yeah, Well, but like, yeah, but like you might only, most organizations might be like, oh yeah, we're going to get to that level of like, dialing automation way over here. It's like, well, actually, if you're literally like, if your TAM is like 500,000 accounts, like in the United States, and it's all call based because these people don't like answer their emails, like maybe you actually start with something like Orem, which is obviously like an emerging category. But in this very situation, it might be like that might be way more fundamental than like CPQ,
Yep. Yeah, no,
right?
I can't agree more. And the other one where this like comes up is when people are like, oh, we need to switch tools, right? Like I need to move from
Oh my God.
Pardot to HubSpot or HubSpot to Marketo or those things. And so a lot of the time, like, and I don't necessarily know what fuels that in somebody's brain, other than sometimes it's just like being loyal to a particular like and familiarity, right? But from a like
Making your mark too, like, well, man, like I just got hired, I better do some shit, right?
yeah, but like what is the problem that you are unable to solve? And so I usually like just push back and say like what can't you do with what we have that you just absolutely can't do it, and like let's go and find out if that's really true, and if that's really true then let's find out what is the value of that actual action, and like does it make sense, because it's a lot of investment in implementation, change
Oh yeah.
management for everyone who has to use it, like everything is just very, very difficult. So I'm pretty like, oh, I don't want to switch tools. I bet I can solve your
Is this
problem.
really worth it? Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a really good blog post by there's this guy Joel Spolsky, who he's the founder of Stack Overflow. He's the founder of like Fog Creek Software, and like Stack Overflow, and so he like, his company made Trello, his company made Stack Overflow, they made Fogs Bugs, et cetera. And he's got this amazing blog called like, I think it's called Joel on Software or Spolsky on Software, I forget. But if you Google it, just look for like, I think it's called like never do the rewrite or something like never rewrite it. And it's the same concept, right? Where oftentimes engineers will show up and they'll be like, oh man, like the new person will show up and be like, oh cool, this like system sucks. It's like written in this like, old technology, this old language. And like obviously this previous engineer was like nowhere near as smart as me, and so on and so forth. And what Joel's blog post talks about is that what you don't appreciate is that like that software or that system or whatever that has been like written, like it's gone through like all the bugs have been found. They've all been killed. Like you don't see that. You see that you're like, oh man, this could be way better. But if you do a rewrite, now you have to go through that whole process again to like find all the bugs, find all the issues, et cetera. And so like I think that people really should appreciate that more when they show up. I mean, we see this a lot with our customer success function is like they we use specialized software to like monitor job changes in our customer base. So like if somebody with like an interesting title shows up, we use a software called SIF Data. There's another company called like User Gems that does this. Where literally what it does is just like, Bert, like we have nearly 300 customers. And so we're just like, hey, like if somebody with a title like sales operations or revenue operations or a CRO or VP of sales shows up in these organizations, like we need to tackle them immediately.
Yeah.
Right, and be like, hey, what's up? How's it going? We're Atrium. We help your managers be like way smarter and higher leverage. And like, we're gonna be friends. Here, let us show you all the value that's being delivered already. Because oftentimes people show up and like they want to put their stamp on something, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe they want to like cut budget or something like that, or like they want to get some quick wins. They're like, oh, okay, I can replace this. Or they're like enthralled to some other vendor, kind of like what you're saying. It's like, you know, I'm a steel brick gal. I don't know who would ever say that. But
Nobody anymore.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Just like, wow, what's wrong with you? Sorry.
Or people
And
are just literally just adverse to change. Like sometimes
sure.
it's that, right? Where they're just like, I just want to do it over here because that's how I've always done it. And so sometimes it's just like trying to get people to like be okay with change is definitely a big challenge.
Yeah, it's almost like yeah, that's funny. It's almost like hey guys, it's all the like kind of same data model. Like we're seeing this with a lot of our customers. So like, we have really high NPS and really high, customer engagement. And so when Atrium customers like leave their like existing organization, go to another organization, very frequently they come back to us and they're like, hey, what's up, right? Like I need this thing, like where's my Atrium at, yo? And right now we don't support HubSpot,
Yeah.
right? as a CRM. And but the funny thing, like we will eventually, but the funny thing is that like the data model is the same,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, you sell to companies and there are humans associated with those companies, and there are, prospective like transactions. In Salesforce they're called ops, in Salesforce sorry, in HubSpot they're called deals. And and so like we've actually seen a bunch of like really like thoughtful sales ops people, which I mean, this is like what happens when you're kind of at the bleeding edge of technology and developing a new category. Is like a lot of our customers are pretty sharp and like forward thinking, and so they have like more critical thinking mindset, so they don't like aren't slavishly like, oh, this place has HubSpot, we need to rip it out immediately and like go on to Salesforce. And so they're like, well, let's like tinker around with this and like see what the deal is. And people are like liked it a lot, which is kind of annoying for us because like, oh man, we got to like start supporting that because people are like, where's my Atria? What's wrong with you? But I think that's a way more thoughtful way of going about it, is like, hey, what can I do with this thing that's already deployed? Because like there's a lot of time and energy that's already gone into this.
Yeah. And a lot of the times the approach I take is, yay, I get to learn a new system. Like I get pretty
Well,
excited about it. Yeah. Like
that's
I'm
not surprising that you would think that, but yes, totally. That's a
like,
glass half full approach, right?
yeah, I'm just super pumped. I'm like, oh, like Sonar has HubSpot, and I'm like, oh, I get to use HubSpot, but for marketing automation, not CRM, but obviously. But I was like, yay, I get to learn this. I'm excited.
Yeah, totally.
And,
I
and
think
I'm
that's
one
like
person who has to learn it, not like a whole group of people, right? As I come in to existing technology, like I'm one, sometimes, but it's a smaller set of people who are impacted by the change too. So I definitely think about that as well. And then just like, how adverse is the particular impacted group to change? Also, it's just a huge thing. Like, will they just hop on and go for it or not? And so that's a factor that I consider too.
Yeah. So when you think about, I mean, we're talking about like, when you should get your first sales ops hire, and then like once that person's in seat, what should their 30, 60, 90 look like? I think one of the things that, that people struggle with a lot is that this is such an emerging, I mean, like sales ops, rev ops, like whatever you call it. Like, there's not a lot of these humans. In fact, actually, we were doing a TAM analysis. This is something we talk about with our SDR all the time, because like the personas that we interact with are, sales management, SDR management, sales operations, sales leadership, et cetera, et cetera. And so if like you go search for those titles on LinkedIn, I think there's like 1 million people with the title VP of sales in North America. I think there's like 3 million people with the title like director of sales or like sales manager, which makes sense. You probably have like a 3-to-1 ratio of that, like kind of like checks out, right? And there's only like, I think there's only like a few 100,000 people with like the title like sales operations, right? Which is, and then the same is actually true with SDR leadership, like SDR management and SDR leadership as well, because in like unsurprisingly, like SDR as like a as like a technology, if you would call it a technology, like this idea of like abstracting out like lead gen from kind of like closing,
Yep.
probably only around like 10 or 15 years old. And the same is true of like sales operations in like the more modern version of sales operations, where it's not like the sales prevention department like just doing like commissions or whatever, but instead is like a consultant and an enabler to the business and so on and so forth. So obviously we need more of those humans, right? Because like it just makes the engine go faster. What are the best ways for people to like get into it,
Yeah.
right? To like
Yeah.
get into RevOps.
Yeah, I would definitely say, one, you have to do some like introspection and say, like, okay, do you like both working with people and working
Sure.
with technology? Because some people just want to like code all day, right? And so, like, if
Yeah,
that's your jam, RevOps is not for you,
it's true.
because it's very, very consultative. And so you definitely have to
It
have a
ought to
lot of
be.
people, right?
Yep.
But if you want to get started, obviously, you could pick a CRM, become a power user, like dig into it. I think that kind of how I started, like how I got here, one of the things that gets me, very excited, is I got in here through data consistency, right? Like I was on a project where I had to figure out how to get like 32 divisions to talk like the same language, in terms of like how they count things, right? And so it's like, okay, like just getting into data and being analytical and understanding the data model and then working backwards from there. So like whenever I'm designing like a new process, I think what's the output? And then, okay, what's the easiest way to get there with the process? As opposed to just like, we need 20 fields or whatever. And it's like, do you? And that happens a lot. I'm like, no, tell me, what is the output? What are we trying to impact? Create, think about it in terms of the report you would build, and then create the fields that you need to do that, and work backwards. So just like kind of thinking through data and the data model, I think is really important. You have to have a lot of technical aptitude, make sure that, yeah, you can be very consultative. Sometimes you just have to like find the common thread and get people to work together. And that's really important. So trying to put yourself in those positions as often as possible throughout your career. And you can relate like personal life to those things too. Like I'm very, very similar in my personal life with getting like maybe my family to work together or something, right? It's just something like a mediator type role. But getting in those positions as often as possible is good.
I love it. In terms of like getting in, like came to it through the data, I think that actually makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of folks might say like, okay, well, how do I become intimate with those things? Like, I'll give you some examples around how we do it here, because like we hire AEs and in short order, we make them experts at like data-driven sales management, which means like understanding kind of like what the core objects are in a CRM, because then they get reported on, right, or like analyzed through Atrium. We have like our whole onboarding approach there. We have like an intro to like what a database looks like, and how there are tables, and how there are like fields that like, and the IDs that get joined across, and so on. And so we actually I have this Google sheet that like models a soccer team, right? It's got like the players, it's got the players table, and then it's got the penalties table, or like the games table, and then it's got the penalties table, and it's got the goals table, and so on and so forth. So how would you recommend like kind of folks getting intimate with what that data model looks like, et cetera, before, so they can start thinking about things in that way?
Yeah, I mean, Trailhead is great. Like Salesforce Trailhead is really, really helpful to think through
Yeah.
those things. But to your point, like anything that you can, like, even if you're just like, I don't know, messing around, like anything that has like a parent-child relationship, and you think about all of the different pieces, you could, like you said, you could look at it as a soccer team. You could look at it as like, I don't know, Christmas gifts and family, like you can do anything to dig into that. But definitely there's a lot of online learning. That you can do, especially around like data warehousing data that is free. Like you can go online and find that stuff. And it explains to you like how the data gets in, how the data comes out. And it's super interesting. But definitely like just going online and finding those courses, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, so like, and we actually have some of our folks take some Salesforce Trailhead classes. I think they're super great in that regard. Yeah, I think one thing that one of our engineers uses this phrase, what you model is what you get, right? I forget exactly how the acronym plays out there. But it's kind of like related to what you were saying earlier, like don't arbitrarily add fields or whatever. Like, what question are we trying to answer later on?
Yeah.
Right.
Always,
Like,
well, it's like always start with the why. Like, why are you doing what you're going to be doing at all? And what is the thing that you want to affect when you do it? And working backwards from there.
right. Exactly. Like, oh, we want to understand our win rate based on these varying lead sources. So let's be crisper around our lead sources. Uh-oh, we're getting to the point where we have too many lead sources. Now this is annoying. Cool. Now, so as a result, I need to subcategorize there. And so now I need an incremental thing, which is primary campaign type,
Right.
as an example.
Yep.
Right. But like there's a problem statement there, which is like, I want to be able to see the win rate I want to see the win rate and the bookings and the pipe generated, et cetera, based on these marketing programs here. Oh, wait, now we're doing a lot of and like, that's a desirable thing. Now we're doing a bunch of marketing programs. Cool. Now we need to iterate that so we can subdivide and actually maybe refactor these lead sources that have sprawled to 12 or whatever, and like get them back down to like 5, that then ties to the taxonomy of like, oh, this is a marketing one right here. Oh, it is? Cool. In which case, which of the 50 campaigns is it?
or
Versus
more.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Or like versus SDR outbound, where it's like, cool, this is SDR outbound. It's always going to be SDR outbound, right? Or like AE self source or what have you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, like what is the question you're trying to answer? Which is
And then
something like
that is like, where do I spend my money? Right. That's really the thing. Like, I think, from a marketing perspective, it's which one of those channels do I want to invest in more? Because they might have a better win rate. And so like, that's like, how do I become super efficient with the dollars that I'm spending? And so I
yeah, so
agree.
that's obviously an important question to
Yeah.
to answer there, right? Versus just like, hey, you know, it kind of comes down to, and this is actually something that we have to coach our AEs on and our CSMs on a lot. Anytime somebody starts out the sentence with like, it would be interesting if, or like, it would be cool if,
No, the answer is no.
right? It would be cool if, and it's like, cool, like how cool, and exactly like, and it's like, but like, can you quantify that? Right?
Yeah.
Like in the case you were just talking about right there, like we run into this because like, Atrium has whatever it is, like 100 pre-baked metrics that can be like permuted like, many hundreds of thousands of ways. But like there's some questions that you can't answer within Atrium in the current situation. And so someone would be like, yeah, it would be really cool if you could like split this by da 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 da. And it's like, yeah, cool. So how do you do that now? And they're like, we don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're
I
like,
definitely always ask the question, especially when like people are like, oh, my hair is on fire. I need you to like do this thing. I need you to create this field. I need you to do whatever. I'm always like, yes, what are you going to do with that? Like, what decision are you going to make as a result of the action that I take? Because otherwise, like, I'll go ahead and create a field, I'll put a validation rule, and now all I'm doing is pissing salespeople off, and you're not even going to do anything with it. So it's always like, are we really going to use it? What is the plan to continue on to like continuously use that if we're going to cause additional friction?
right. Totally. I mean, I do this master class on setting and managing with goals. And one of the things that I kind of talk about is like data capture, right? Because it's like a whole step. It's just like, cool, like what are the metrics we're going to pay attention to? What are the, like, how do we then capture the data in order to then calculate those relevant metrics? Okay, great. Now that we have that in place, what are the appropriate goals, like the levels that we should have on those leading, intermediary and lagging indicators, um, and uh, and and then now we have to consume them. Right now we have to like consume and like manage based on it. Cool. So in the section that talks about data capture, that's one of the things that I really harp on with people is like, is the juice worth the squeeze? One, can you automate the data capture as much as possible?
Yeah.
Right. So like a good example of this would be like one of the things that's kind of like powerful about Atrium is it just hooks directly into the calendar system. So it hooks into Google Calendar, it hooks into Office 365, does some clever things in order to like, so it'll show you how many customer facing meetings your AEs are having or what have you. And it does some clever things around like, it ties them to the opportunities associated with it. So you can then like make judgments about like the meetings and like they're tied to ops or not tied to ops, or is it a first meeting versus like a subsequent meeting or whatever. But then oftentimes what you get is people say like, oh, okay, well, like I want to be able to differentiate between like a demo meeting versus a disco meeting versus a proposal meeting or whatever. I'm just like, cool, God bless you. I get it. Now what you're going to have to do is get people to like manually declare that in some sort of capacity. And are your reps like, I get that it would be nice, right? But are your
Yeah.
reps going to do it?
No.
Right. And then moreover, what's the question we're trying to answer here? Oh, well, like I want to see the conversion rate out of like how many proposals does it take in order to sort of get a deal? Oh, got it. Well, probably that should just be a stage then,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
You can do
Like,
that somewhere else. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it should probably be a stage and then get the conversion rate out of that. And like it's just a stage along the sales process versus now what you previously were going to do was like foist a bunch of like manual logging behavior across like your 50 reps. And like you see this show up, it shows up in like very large organizations when they go through some sort of like sales consulting process, whether it's like command of the message or like through force management or maybe like somebody else like that, where it's just like they want to boil, it's very like top down. It makes sense because like there's some CRO and they're just like, we're gonna do this, I don't care about you 400 reps, do it, right? Which I mean, I have empathy for, but it's one of those things where it's like, cool, is the juice worth the squeeze when you've got like 10 reps or 20 reps and like you're just going to add 30 minutes or like an hour of like button clicking to them on a weekly basis? Like, ugh, don't know, man.
No, and I mean, and sometimes like that is the answer, right? Like it's like, sorry,
Sometimes
there's
it
no
has to be
other
worth it.
way. There's no other way for us to get this, and I'm sorry. Like I've definitely had to say that before, but it's like,
Yep.
you know, we're asking a very specific question. We need to capture this data in order to answer that question. Can't automate it. Sorry, you know, that happens.
Right. And I think revealing that to that's one of the things I tell people is just like, can you automate it as much as possible? And then when you can't, then you can like externalize that and be like, look, we really tried to automate this and like we can't, we can't do that, unfortunately. So like we need you to signify this because it's really important, in order for us to like, raise this funding round or be able to understand like which of the programs are most important or fill in the blank or what have you.
And some
um
of the times you can brainstorm with that person though and figure out like a correlating metric. Like sometimes it's like,
sure.
oh, you're trying to answer this question, but like
Is
we
this
have
close
this
enough?
really adjacent, like, and I don't have to do anything. Like, does that work? And most of the time people are like, yeah, sure, that's good enough, you know?
Oh, I didn't even realize we had that. Yeah, dude,
Yeah.
there's literally a customer facing meeting earlier today where we were talking about that, where they were like, okay, well, like, we create these like it's similar situation where they're like, hey, we create these meeting objects, like the compliance on it is like pretty bad. And then we don't create, this is why I'm a big fan of like creating stage zero opportunities, like get something into an op as quickly as possible, because then like the clock starts, you can do like good stages, et cetera. Things don't
All
get
in one
like
object. Yeah.
all in one object. Like, hey, just like model it, model it, model it, model it, model it, just like model early and often, right? And in this case, and that was kind of like a takeaway. They're like, oh, got it, we probably should do this, but like, oh, so like, you can't show us exactly how many of these like very bespoke event objects that are being created. And I'm like, yeah, but we can show you how many like meetings your SDRs are creating through Google Calendar there. Is that like, and then you had like the opportunities creation like next to it. And it's like, is that close enough? And they're like, oh yeah, totally. I just needed to see the ratio there.
Yeah, it's so true. Like it just helping people see it is always good. And just yeah, like you said, asking the right questions. Like, does this work? Okay, is it good enough? Was it like 80% there? Okay, let's go.
Well, I think that's the thing is that, and this is something that we have to coach our team on quite a bit. And I mean, not just our team, but also like the user base and like the market on is I need to like look up what this is, but it's kind of like the difference between like accuracy and precision. And it's kind of like the amount, like how accurate do you have to be for like the thing in question. So I'll give you an example. Like, if you're if you're doing like, physical chemistry or something like that, right? Like you probably have to be like pretty precise with your titration and all those sort of things, like how, the chemicals that you're putting together. If we're measuring salespeople, like salespeople are like squishy,
Yeah.
right? If we're measuring salespeople and there's like a lot of slop in the system, whatever, like, does it matter if like, there's a little bit of sand in the data or even like a lot of bit of sand in the data? Like, no, not really, because like it's kind of garbage in, garbage out a little bit. And so it's like, how precise does this need to be? Like really all you care about, like, oh, well, like, is the win rate like really, is it defined the way I want to be defined? And it's like, hey, look, like all you're trying to do is compare your reps to each other. Like this is a comparative thing, like
Yeah.
that, irrespective of how you define win rate, that rep right there is 50% lower than everybody else. I think
Yeah.
that's the important thing.
It really is. And I always am like, listen, is the process, is it consistent? So I don't
Yeah.
really care about how accurate it is. I mean, like I may at some point, but like probably the issue is inconsistency. And if you have consistency, then you can move on to like accuracy. But if it's inconsistent, people are moving stages all over the place because they're not properly defined or true, or, trained
Mhm.
on or something. Like that's more of the problem, like than the actual like number at the end of the day, right? It's just, is it a consistent process? And that's way, and then you get consistent data. And that's way
Yep.
more important.
Yep. Well, cool. Well, guess what, Sarah, we're out of time. Shocking. I told you that it would fly by, but
Yeah, it's
super fun.
great.
Yeah, super fantastic geeking out with you. Really appreciate it. Next week, we have a really fantastic on July 8th. We have a really fantastic person who's coming to visit with us. Doug Landis, who's a growth partner at Emergence Capital. He's absolutely fantastic. He used to do sales productivity and
That is
at
great.
yeah, he's fantastic. Sales productivity at Box, at Salesforce. He's fantastic. He's a a wonderful MC. He's a trained actor. Most people don't realize this. It's unsurprising anytime you see him on stage. You're like, man, that guy slays at like conferences. You're like, yeah, of course, that's why. So that's gonna be really fantastic. Wonderful, Sarah. I really appreciate you taking the time. Have a great weekend. Okay.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.
Okay. See ya.